Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the recent escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In fact, Russian forces on Monday conducted a massive missile strike against over 20 Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kyiv. Russia termed these strikes as retaliation for Saturday's attack on a key bridge linking Russia with Crimea, which damaged the strategic supply and logistic artery for the Russian forces. Meanwhile, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has said that Minsk and Moscow have agreed to deploy a joint regional group of military forces in response to alleged aggressions or aggravations on Belarus's western border. On the other hand, United Nations General Assembly on Monday rejected Russia's call for the 193-member body to hold a secret ballot later this week on whether to condemn Moscow's move to annex 4 partially occupied regions in Ukraine. So what is the significance of this new escalation in Russia-Ukraine conflict, and what more can be expected on the war front there from both sides? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have with us in the studio retired Major General Dhruv Katoch. He's the Director of India Foundation. Welcome, General Katoch, to our studios. We are also joined by two more distinguished panelists. D. Bala Venkatesh Verma, he is the former Ambassador of India to Russian Federation. He's joining us. Welcome, Ambassador Verma. And Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey from the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at SIS JNU is also with us. Welcome to you as well, Professor Pandey. Let me begin with you, General Katoch, and let's start by asking the obvious question. All of us know why the escalation is there. Of course, Russia has said that, this is in retaliation to the attack on that bridge connecting Russian mainland and Crimea. But what now, as in terms of, is this one-off escalation points, or it goes, southwards from here onwards?
Vishal, this is one war which has taken place now. I think it's on to the 8th month now, and it's becoming very difficult to predict which way it will go from here. In fact, most of the analysts have already gone wrong right since from the beginning of the war as to what is going to happen in the future. So to hazard any guess is a difficult proposition. But that notwithstanding, the way I see it is that in the present circumstances, we are not coming to any conclusion either way. Russia doesn't have the strength to force its will onto Ukraine, and Ukraine does not have the strength to change the status quo as it is existing now, despite all the assistance it is getting from the West. So in a sense, what I feel is a strategic stalemate has been achieved or has come about. And now to break that strategic stalemate, either it can come about through talks or through one party getting military superiority over the other and forcing a solution. Now, I don't see the second half coming about, that any party being in a position to impose a military solution.
Okay.
So what can happen now is that there will be that we can actually achieve some sort of a compromise through talks. Now, the problem here lies, and this I want to, your viewers must be very, I want to explain this very clearly to them. From the Russian side, there will be no compromise on the 4 areas they have already taken, leaving aside Crimea. So the 4 provinces which they have taken, that is, as far as the Russians are concerned, the new status quo. They will not accept any changes to that. There may be minor adjustments here and there. The problem is, as far as President Zelensky is concerned, he cannot go back to the people and now say, okay, we are going to have a ceasefire and this is the new status quo. Because his people will ask him...
It's a loss of face for him as well.
It's a loss of face totally. And his people will ask him, President Zelensky, why did you go to war? So this is the problem. Now, how are you going to break the stalemate? Ultimately, I think the solution is you've got to stay on your present lines. The Russians are not going to give in under any circumstances. So the given has to be from Zelensky's side. And for him to give in, I think the West has to pressurize him. Okay. Otherwise, this war will continue. I mean, it can carry on for another 6 months at a lower scale. But if Russia is provoked further, and if that provocation is as serious as the bridge, the destruction of the bridge, then I think they will extend their operations onto Odisha, capture Odisha, and make Ukraine a landlocked country.
Okay.
That, I think, is going to be the next level of escalation should it take place.
Okay. Let me bring in the two other gentlemen as well. Mr. Burma, I'd like to bring you in here since you've served as India's representative to the Russian Federation. Let's understand it from their strategic point of view and at the place where Russia stands now. Of course, given the kind of reaction which has come in response to the attack on that bridge, clearly points out, as General Katoj was also referring to, Russia's resolve in terms of response mechanism. But is that response just a reactionary tactics as of now?
Well, I generally agree with General Katoj's analysis. I think it's the 8th month of the war. Both sides still believe that they can gain the upper hand militarily if they continue the war. That has led to both sides taking escalatory actions. And unfortunately, we are now at a phase where the escalation is now reaching a fairly serious level. The attack on the Crimea bridge was not just an attack on a bridge, it was an attack which the Russians said was a red line for them. And we have seen the Russian reaction, which they're following the attack on the bridge, the 20-odd cities that have been hit. And today also, there have been some further military strikes. The second aspect is that Russia has certain irreducible political demands, and General Katoj referred to that. Even though they are not fully in occupation of the 4 territories that went to a referendum and joined the Russian Federation, Russia, it appears from what we hear from Moscow, is that Russia is determined to complete the annexation of these 4 territories. Mm-hmm. Now, what it will mean in international law is a separate issue. It will be an issue, but it will be handled in the peace negotiations and thereafter. The Western support to Ukraine also is reaching a phase where there may be a major escalation. So unfortunately, the war is still in a phase where both sides, and it's not just Russia, Ukraine, but Russia and the West believe that the other side can be put down through military force. And my assessment is that that is not possible. Okay. And that is also consistent with what India has been saying all along, which is that there is no military solution to this. However, now there are some voices in the West which are advising caution. This is a new element. It had not happened before. Even President Biden said that we have to take the nuclear issue pretty seriously. There are some attempts at dialogue. President Putin is expected to meet President Erdogan in the next 2 days, and the Turkish side is posing some actions. But however, to summarize the present situation, it is a matter of concern. It is still in an escalation phase, unfortunately. And we hope that both sides, or at least one side, will realize that there is no military solution to this, and better sense will prevail on both sides, including pressure from the international community, and there'll be a change in course. But presently, we are still in an escalation phase.
Okay. Professor Pandey, do you agree with this assessment that the recent escalation which has happened from both sides in terms of, the attack on the Crimea bridge and the retaliation by the Russian forces in terms of missile strikes against several cities. Now, does this escalation, put this conflict between these two nations in a very critical phase, wherein, it can go either ways?
Yes, but I wouldn't say it can go either way. There is stalemate. General Katoj talked about stalemate. There is a particular term for it in geopolitics and in strategic studies. It is called war of attrition. So this stalemate is leading the conflict into a war of attrition in which both the parties are able to hold to their own, And at the same time, they are trying to wear down the other side in the hope that the other will buckle down and will come to negotiating table. But as my two colleagues said, the likelihood of either of the two accepting terms dictated by the other is very less. So it is leading to a war of attrition. It is leading to a stalemate in which off and on we will see escalation as we saw yesterday, but not much will change on the ground. Although the Ukrainians were able to regain some territory in the last 2 weeks, but that has actually led to further escalation as the Russians can't afford to lose the war. As General Katoch said, that is the red line for them. They cannot compromise on the 4 regions that they have incorporated. So it is because of this, the war is leading to a stalemate situation. And of course, there are voices in Europe, even in Biden administration, a week back or so, there was even fear of some sort of use of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear strikes. Even Putin hinted at it. But that has subsequently, that rhetoric has come down, but not the escalation. So it's a very precarious situation, and it is very difficult to predict anything at this point in time.
Okay. General Katoch, you're earlier pointing out that, of course, it is almost impossible to predict a situation like this, specifically conflicts wherein both sides are not willing to, budge from their respective stands as well. That apart, you were saying earlier that this might be a long drawn-out conflict. Perhaps maybe next few months, both sides might have some, small victories to celebrate. But the escalations like these can happen. The other option is dialogue, the process of dialogue, which India has been advocating about, which all of you were also pointing out. So coming back to the process of dialogue, where do we stand? And how, hopeful can we be in terms of looking at some concrete result in the coming weeks or even months?
I think the Indian stance has been very correct right from the beginning. We simply said, start speaking to each other. I mean, besides that, there is no other way really. And while the West has been, let me put it very bluntly, they have been trying to put pressure on India to support the Western stand. Right down to one of the people telling me personally that, listen, India should not be on the wrong side of history. So I told him, I said, you don't have to teach us what is the right side of history. We know what is correct morally. And what is correct morally is what has been stated by the Prime Minister, stop the war, start talking. And that is what our stance is. There is no reason for us to say that, okay, the Russians are right, or the Ukrainians are right, or the West is right. Right? Stop the war, start talking. It is a European war. It is not a world's war. It is not India's war. So having said that, talks. I think one of the things which we should first away start, and I think India can play a very important role in that, is to get an agreement from the Russians, specifically from the Russians, of no first use of nuclear weapons. If you can just get the Russians to say, okay, we will not use nuclear weapons first, I think 70% of the tension across the world will go down, because the larger fear today is that escalation, if it leads to what people call a tactical use of tactical nuclear weapons, and I want to make it very clear, nuclear weapons are not tactical. They are strategic. So you may use the word tactical and make it sound as if it is very small. The implications are strategic. It will lead to magnifying the impact. It will lead to escalation. And it will lead to consequences which nobody will be able to control.
Okay.
So I think we should at least try to stop it there. Okay, nuclear weapons will not be used. That is one. Number two, I think I think Europe now, it is very important on the part of Europe to come around and tell the Americans, no more. Because the Europeans are being hit very hard. And if they continues like this, I think Europe will suffer much more than what Ukraine is suffering. So it is up to them to tell the Americans, stop, the war has to stop. And once the Americans and the Europeans get out, then President Zelensky will come to the negotiating table and sign the terms as it is existing now. He still has got Odisha. I think he should be wise enough to understand if he continues, he will lose Odisha, and then Ukraine will become a landlocked country. They've lost everything. So he has to cut his losses. That's the way I look at it. And that is the only way we can get peace. That's the way I look at it.
Okay, so dialogue is the way forward. There's something which, all sane people and countries and experts have been pointing out, including India. Now, Ambassador Verma, one more aspect we would want to understand the significance. Just on Monday recently, the UNGA, has also voted against the Russian proposal to hold a secret ballot over the discussion on annexation of 4 regions by it. Now, the question is, how significant is this vote? That's one. And two, when we're talking about the peace process, the dialogue process, the role of United Nations there.
Right from the beginning, I think just to support what General Kotoj said, India has been a voice in favor of peace. India, in fact, has had a very consistent policy over the last 8 months, and we have repeated that policy to everyone. Prime Minister Modi has spoken to President Putin several times. He also spoke to President Zelensky, and to all our Western partners, we've said the same thing. To all our Global South partners, we've said the same. For India to move from a peace seeker to a peacemaker, I think there has to be the right timing and the right circumstances. And the right timing and circumstances includes that European countries, the United States, and on the other side, Russia, lower their war aims. And they accept some measures to de-escalate on the nuclear side, on the humanitarian side, on not attacking infrastructure projects, not attacking civilians, civilian centers. There are a number of measures that can lower the temperature. Once you lower the temperature, I think when the war aims are reduced and lowering of the temperature, I think the circumstances and the atmosphere can be created for which I think India is well positioned at the right time. Probably now is not the right time, but when the time comes, India is extremely well positioned to play a positive role. And our statement, which was repeated by our foreign minister our external affairs minister at the General Assembly, our spokesman just a couple of days ago, we have repeated this. Now, the vote at the General Assembly is non-binding, but symbolically important. Now, Russia has sought a secret ballot on the understanding that a number of countries actually favor Russia, but because of the immense pressure that is coming from the West, some of the developing countries are not able to exercise their true vote. That is the argument. However, the General Assembly is an open body. Democracy in the modern age is open governance, openly arrived at. So I think it was right on part of India to say that we should have an open ballot.
Okay.
But the world public opinion in any case is deeply split. It's only about 30, 40 countries which are strongly supporting Ukraine. Though a majority of countries in the world do not support military action, continuation of the war and continuation of the military action by Russia, that does not translate into sympathy for Ukraine, because this is actually a problem of European security. And European security has collapsed because of the lack of accommodation, mutual accommodation amongst the large European states, and including the United States, including Russia. So it is a problem that they themselves have created. But European security is now affecting, the collapse of European security is now affecting the whole world in terms of fuel prices, in terms of fertilizer, food, commodity prices, inflation rising. Developing countries like India are facing the brunt. So when public opinion does change strongly in favor of peace, I think, including at the UN, things can come about.
Okay.
Of course, at the Security Council, because it's the fight between the major powers, some of which are permanent members of the Security Council. The Security Council is immobilized because of the veto provision. So we cannot expect anything much to come from the Security Council. But gradually, I think international opinion is moving towards putting pressure on both sides to cease hostilities and come to some political settlement through dialogue and diplomacy, which is actually consistent with India's position right from the beginning.
Indeed, it is. Professor Pandey, your views at the end towards this entire way of handling the situation when we are talking about peace talks or dialogue, the process of dialogue being advocated by India and several other countries as well. How do you see this coming about, given the fact that there are these periodic escalations and the recent one has been very, very severe?
Well, I would also like to remind you that apart from calling for dialogue and diplomacy, India has also underlined that the UN norms and laws need to be respected. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of states need to be respected. So that is the most critical issue, because the situation on the ground has changed, and any change in the ground situation is not likely to happen. And it is because of this that the possibility of real breakthrough, I mean, a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire, in which at least the fighting stops. And it is hoped that maybe during the winter season, when it gets very cold, there is a possibility of the de-escalation. But at the same time, there are others who believe that Russia might take advantage. They have a long history and expertise in fighting in very cold conditions. It was as recently as the Second World War. So they may try to escalate the situation to their advantage during the winter months. So it is really difficult to predict anything unless both the parties realize that the possibility of getting an outright victory is very remote. And the best course for them is to at least agree to a ceasefire, even if temporary. Unless they realize it, the possibilities are very bleak for a real breakthrough on the ground.
Okay. There it is. Thank you so much, Professor Pandey, Ambassador Venkatesh Verma, and General Katoch as well for sharing your views and insight with us and our viewers. As our experts were pointing out, very clearly it is a precarious situation in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The recent escalation has been of a serious nature, and all sides, all stakeholders here, specifically, international bodies like United Nations have been calling upon moving ahead on the path to process of peace and dialogue, which India has also been advocating. We'll keep a close watch on the developments and keep you informed of what exactly is transpiring on the ground, its significance for us and for the rest of the world as well. Keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.